Today I will tell you a story I never thought I would share. A story about trust family and the silence that cut deeper than any word could. I once inherited millions of dollars, and I told no one. I wanted to see who my family truly was, so I reached out for help, pretending to be in need. What I received was not compassion. It was silence, excuses, and judgment. And when the moment of truth came, only one person chose to stand beside me. That is the heart of my journey, the reason I am opening my life to you today. If you believe stories like this should be told, please like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment to join our community. This is Grandma Life Stories, where real hearts are tested and true love is revealed. That was not the story I thought my life would ever write. I never dreamed of wealth. All I ever wanted was to live quietly and plant small seeds of kindness around me. Sometimes I bought a lottery ticket, not because I wished for luxury, but because I imagined just for a second that if fortune ever came to me, I could share it with people who had nothing. My name is Linda. I am an ordinary grandmother who lives on the edge of San Diego in a little house with a rose garden that blooms almost all year round. Every morning I water the petals, watching them open to the sunlight as if they are greeting me. That garden has always been my joy. Its simple beauty reminded me that life does not need to be extravagant to be meaningful. I believed in goodness in living peacefully with others. Perhaps that belief made me naive because nothing prepared me for the truth I discovered. When the day came that I needed a hand, my own family turned their faces away. It was one evening at my son Mark's house. I was not feeling well. My chest was heavy, my breath short, the kind of discomfort that told me I should go to the hospital. I had no car that night, so I asked softly if someone could drive me. I was not demanding, only hoping. Mark sighed with impatience, his voice sharp. He said he had work early in the morning, that I always chose inconvenient times. His wife Rachel shook her head and muttered something about being too busy about needing to put the kids to bed. They looked at each other and then away from me. No one moved. No chair scraped the floor. No hand reached for the car keys. I sat there feeling smaller with each passing second. My heart beat faster, not only from the sickness, but from the coldness in the room. And then, breaking the silence, a small voice rose. Emily, my granddaughter, barely 12, whispered with trembling courage. She said, "If no one will help, then I will call someone for Grandma. I will not let her go alone." The room froze. Every adult face turned toward her. Her words, innocent yet bold, cut through the air like glass. My eyes filled, and a tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. That child saw me, truly saw me, when her own parents did not. I sat there asking myself the question that still haunts me. How can a family become so cold? How can love fade into silence that night? While I wiped away my tears, the secret I carried inside me pressed heavier than ever. No one knew I had inherited millions. No one knew that their response to my simple plea was the test that would define their place in my heart forever. I thought of the roses in my garden, how they open each day, no matter how rough the weather is. I wondered if my love had been like that, giving without asking, only to be cut down by indifference. The truth is, wealth does not change who you are. It only reveals who others choose to be. And in my family, that revelation was both heartbreaking and necessary. I will never forget Emily's face, pale but determined, standing up when every grown-up stayed seated. At that moment, I realized that innocence sometimes carries more courage than age ever does. And as I left that house, later driven not by Mark or Rachel, but by a neighbor Emily called, I held on to a painful truth. Family is not defined by blood alone. It is revealed by who stands beside you when you are weakest. That night became the first page of a story that would test every bond I thought was unbreakable. And so I tell you again in my own words, I inherited millions and I told no one. I reached out to my family for help as a way to see the truth. They gave me silence, excuses, and judgment. In the end, only one stood by me. When I close my eyes and think back, I can still remember the day everything shifted beneath my feet. For most of my life, I lived with the quiet certainty that we were ordinary. My late husband, Daniel, was a steady man, never loud, never boastful, never careless. He worked for decades in small business ventures around San Diego. From what I knew, there were ups and downs, the kind of struggles that every couple faces when raising children and trying to keep a roof overhead. I thought we barely scraped by because he never let on that there was more. What I did not know until much later was that Daniel had been quietly building something beyond my imagination. I still remember the morning after the lawyer's letter arrived. The sun had barely crept over the hills, and the kitchen smelled of the roses I had cut the night before. My hands shook as I held the envelope, the bold black print of the law firm staring back at me. At first I feared some old debt had resurfaced, or perhaps a mistake that would swallow what little peace I had. But as I read, I realized it was no error. It was Daniel's will, carefully written, sealed away, and meant to be opened only after both time and silence had passed. He had arranged everything without ever telling me. Daniel had left behind an estate far greater than I could comprehend. The numbers were dizzying: investments in property shares in a local manufacturing company and a series of accounts that had grown quietly over decades. All of it meticulously prepared, handed solely to me. Millions, the letter said, enough to ensure I would never have to worry again. I pressed the paper to my chest, my breath ragged. This was not a dream I had ever asked for. Wealth was something I saw on television, read about in papers, but never once chased. All my life, I found joy in smaller things, buying a lottery ticket just to feel the thrill of what if, dropping spare coins into a charity box at church, carrying groceries for a neighbor who had no car. Those were my riches, the warmth of giving without keeping score. To think that Daniel had known this side of me and still in secret worked to leave behind such a fortune, it pierced my heart. I should have been grateful, and I was, but alongside gratitude was sorrow. Why had he never told me? Why had he carried this weight alone? Perhaps he feared I would worry, or that money would change the way I looked at him. Perhaps he simply wanted to protect the simple rhythm of our lives. I will never know. In those first days, I stayed silent. Not a soul around me knew of the letter or its contents. My children believed me to be the same old mother, still tending her roses, still counting coupons at the grocery store. And that was how I wanted it. I feared what truth might reveal. Would love still be pure if money stood in the middle of it? There was also another reason, one that I hardly dared admit even to myself. For years, I had carried questions about my family's heart. I remembered the sharpness in Mark's voice whenever I asked for the smallest favor. I recalled Rachel's polished smile, more concerned with what her friends thought than with whether I had eaten. And yet I had also known Emily's quiet footsteps running up to water my plants, her giggles echoing in the garden. So when the inheritance became real, when I stood in my kitchen with more wealth than I had ever imagined, I felt an urge to test something greater than my luck. I wanted to know if I stripped everything away, if I remained nothing more than a fragile old woman in need of kindness. How would they treat me? Would compassion bloom in them, or would excuses and silence fill the room? It was a dangerous thought. People say money is a mirror. It reflects what already lives in the soul. I did not want to believe that my own children, whom I had raised with lullabies and discipline, could be careless when the time came. But a whisper in me said I needed to see. I needed proof. And so I decided I would tell no one. Not about the accounts, not about the houses Daniel had quietly secured, not about the figures that could have erased every debt, every burden my children carried. I would live as I always had, simple clothes, modest meals, no hints of luxury. I would be Linda, the grandmother who tended roses, not Linda, the heir to millions. At night, I folded the lawyer's letter and tucked it deep inside the old Bible Daniel had once given me. There, between fragile pages, His words slept. I would open them again when the time was right. For now, the world would see me as they always had. Weeks passed and I went about my days as though nothing had changed. Yet inside, I carried a secret heavy enough to bend my back. When I looked at Mark and Rachel, I watched every word, every flicker of their eyes with sharper attention. And when Emily came laughing and eager to help, I wondered if her kindness was a glimmer of what Daniel must have hoped for in our family. Still, I did not speak. I knew the test would only work if my silence held. Only then would the truth rise. I sometimes wonder if my memory betrays me, if maybe I look back on things more harshly than they were. But no. The words are still sharp even after the years. They cut when they were spoken, and they cut again when I recall them. Mark, my son, had always carried a storm in his chest. Even when he was younger, he had an edge to his temper. After his father passed, that edge sharpened. The debts piled up one after another, credit cards, bad investments, loans he never explained. Each time I tried to comfort him, he snapped as if my voice itself was another weight on his shoulders. One afternoon, I had called to ask if he could drive me to the market since the bus schedule had changed. "Mom," he said, his voice rising like a whip, "I don't have time to play chauffeur. Do you think I'm made of free hours? I'm already drowning here. You want to add your errands to my mess?" I remember pressing the phone to my ear, heat rising in my cheeks. I only thought I began, but he cut me off. "You always think I can do everything for you. Well, I can't. Maybe you should think about moving into some place where they take care of people like you." His words lodged in me like thorns. I said nothing more, only thanked him quickly and hung up. That night, I stared at the ceiling, wondering if he saw me as nothing more than a burden. Rachel was different, but her distance hurt in another way. My daughter built her life around appearances, her high-rise near Little Italy. Her designer suits her perfect Instagram smiles. She loved to be seen as successful, refined, untouchable. But under that polish, I rarely glimpsed the warmth a mother longs for. I had once called her on a Sunday just to hear her voice. "Rachel, I made that soup you loved as a girl. If you have time, maybe you could stop by this week and share a bowl." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Mother, I have a networking dinner. Tuesday, a client breakfast. Wednesday, and I might be flying out Friday. I can't just drop everything. You should try ordering delivery sometimes, or, I don't know, join one of those senior clubs. People your age do that." Her words weren't cruel, but they were cold. I hung up staring at the pot on my stove, steam curling toward an empty chair. I told myself she was busy, that her life was demanding. Still, a voice inside whispered, "She doesn't want to make time for you." If Mark's anger was a blow, Rachel's indifference was ice. Both left me aching. And then there was Emily, sweet 15-year-old Emily, Mark's daughter. She was a light that slipped through the cracks of my loneliness. She would appear at my gate after school, her backpack bouncing her smile easy. "Grandma, I brought you some daisies. I saw them at the stand near the bus stop and thought of your garden." Or, "Grandma, do you want me to water the roses today?" They looked thirsty when I walked by. She never asked for anything in return. She never looked at me as though I was heavy or inconvenient. Instead, she laughed, filling my house with a sound I thought I had lost when my children grew older and busier. One evening, she sat at my kitchen table, chin resting in her hands as I baked cookies. "Grandma," she said softly, "do you ever get lonely?" Her question pierced me. I forced a smile. "Sometimes. But when you're here, the house feels alive again." She beamed, her eyes warm. "Then I'll keep coming. I don't like the idea of you being by yourself too much." I wanted to tell her everything, then the truth about Daniel's will, the fortune locked away, the test forming in my heart. But she was too young to carry such secrets. So instead, I hugged her tightly, letting her small arms remind me what love felt like without conditions. It was in those contrasts, Mark's harshness, Rachel's detachment, Emily's kindness, that the seed of an idea took root. Daniel had left me with more wealth than I could ever spend, more than any of them could ever need. But I feared what it might do if revealed. Would Mark's desperation turn greedy? Would Rachel see me as a stepping stone for her image? Would Emily's innocent warmth survive the shadow of money I realized I could not simply guess? I had to know. The thought frightened me. To test one's family is to risk breaking what remains unbroken. But I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. I needed to know whether love still lived inside my children or if life had drained it away. That night, I sat at my small wooden table, the one Daniel and I had eaten countless dinners on, and whispered aloud to the empty room. If I remain only a mother, only a grandmother without riches, without power, who will stand beside me? The walls gave no answer, but my heart did. I would find out. I decided on a plan, careful, simple. I would ask for little things, nothing grand help with repairs, a ride, a moment of time. Requests that cost no fortune, but carried weight in love. I would not hint at my inheritance. I would not reveal Daniel's hidden gift. I would watch quietly how they chose to respond. Perhaps I hoped to be proven wrong, to discover that Mark's sharpness hid loyalty, that Rachel's distance cloaked devotion. Perhaps I feared being proven right. Either way, the truth mattered more than comfort. As I extinguished the kitchen light and climbed the stairs to bed, my chest heavy with both dread and resolve, I thought of Emily's promise. "I'll keep coming, Grandma." In her, I still believed in goodness. But with the others, I could not rest until I knew. And so the test began, though they didn't know it yet. The first test began with something small, almost ordinary. My roof had indeed been leaking, though only a little, just a drip over the kitchen sink when it rained. I could afford to fix it easily, but that was not the point. I needed to know how my son would respond if I reached out for help. I dialed his number on a Tuesday evening, my heart beating harder than it should have for such a simple call. When he picked up, his voice was rushed, distracted. "Yeah, Mom, I'm in the middle of something, make it quick." I steadied my tone. "Mark, I didn't want to bother you, but the roof has started leaking worse this week. I thought of calling a contractor, but before I do, I wondered if you could help me with just a little. Not the full cost, just a part of it. Maybe a couple $100. There was a sharp exhale on the other end. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes." I answered softly, though my palms had begun to sweat. "It's not a big job." I thought maybe you could spare a little since you've always been handy with repairs, or even recommend someone. He laughed, but it wasn't kind. It was short, bitter, almost like a bark. "Mom, do you even listen when I talk to you? I'm buried in debt. I told you that a dozen times. Every day I'm getting calls from collectors. I barely sleep at night. And here you are asking me for money." I swallowed, my throat dry. "I didn't mean to add to your stress. I thought just a little. His voice sharpened, rising higher. "A little is still something I don't have. Do you think I'm hiding cash under my mattress? You know what, if you can't handle the house, then maybe you should sell it. Get an apartment or one of those senior condos. Why hold on to a place you can't take care of? It's not my job to keep bailing you out." I felt the words like stones thrown at my chest. "Mark?" I whispered I wasn't asking for you to bail me out. You just thought wrong," he snapped. "I've got my own mess. Don't make me carry yours, too. I can't do this. Not now, not ever." The silence stretched between us. My kitchen seemed too quiet, every sound of the refrigerator humming, magnified as if mocking me. Finally, I forced a steady breath and said, "I understand." "Forget I asked." He muttered something I couldn't quite catch. Then the line went dead. I sat at the table, my hands trembling. I stared at the phone, the glow of the screen fading into black. My son, the boy I once carried in my arms, had spoken to me as though I were nothing more than another creditor chasing him down. I didn't cry, not then. I had grown too used to swallowing tears before they could rise. Instead, I closed my eyes and tried to remember the sound of his laughter when he was a boy. back when he would run through the yard barefoot, shouting for me to watch his jumps, proud of even the smallest leaps. That boy had looked to me with trust. Where had he gone? The pain spread in my chest, heavy and suffocating. I thought of Daniel, my late husband, and how he would have handled this. He would have put his arm around me, told me not to take Mark's words to heart. But Daniel was gone, and the house felt too big, too empty. I rose from the chair, slowly walking to the window. The night outside was still the streetlight casting pale circles on the pavement. I whispered to myself, "It's only the first test, only the beginning." Still, the result cut deep. I hadn't expected him to shower me with money. I knew his struggles. What I longed for was compassion, a word of comfort, even a promise to help in another way. Instead, I was handed rejection, sharp and final. I poured myself a glass of water, the faucet dripping into the cup. I drank slowly, willing the ache in my chest to settle. This was why I had kept Daniel's inheritance hidden. If this was how my son reacted to a small request, how would he respond if he knew I had millions at my disposal? I set the glass down and took another steadying breath. One step at a time, I murmured, "Don't judge too quickly. See it through." But inside, I knew I would not forget his words. Sell the house. It's not my job. They would echo in me for a long time, a reminder that sometimes the truest answers come not from grand gestures, but from the simplest of tests. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the faint drip of the roof above, I held on to the silence. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was firmer. The truth had begun to reveal itself, and I needed to be strong enough to face it no matter how much it hurt. The week after my conversation with Mark, I decided to approach Rachel. The first test had already wounded me more deeply than I had expected, but I knew I couldn't stop halfway. My daughter had always been polished sharp, the kind of woman who walked into a room and instantly commanded attention. She lived in a sleek, high-rise apartment in Little Italy, all glass windows and expensive furniture. Rachel had built her life around appearances. How things looked to others mattered to her more than anything else. I needed something simple to ask of her, something that wouldn't involve money. That's when I thought of my eyes. The truth was, I did have an appointment with an ophthalmologist downtown. The letters on the page blurred more than they used to, and at night, lights sometimes streaked across my vision. I didn't want to make the trip alone. I could drive, but traffic downtown unnerved me, and parking was nearly impossible. Asking Rachel to take me didn't feel unreasonable. I phoned her on a Thursday morning. She answered with her usual brisk tone. "Hi, Mom. I'm just about to head into a meeting." "Can this be quick?" I hesitated. "It won't take long. I have an eye appointment next week downtown, and I was wondering if you could drive me. Just this once. I'd feel better if someone was with me." There was a pause followed by the sound of papers shuffling. "When is it?" she asked. "Tuesday at 10 a.m. It shouldn't last more than an hour. We could grab lunch afterward if you have time." Her sigh was audible even through the phone. "Mom, that's during peak work hours. I can't just rearrange my schedule to chauffeur you around." My fingers tightened on the phone. I only asked because it's downtown. I don't like navigating those streets alone anymore, and afterward my eyes might be dilated. Rachel's voice grew firmer. "You can call a cab or one of those rideshare apps. That's what they're for. Honestly, Mom, you need to start leaning on services like everyone else does. Family can't be your solution every time." The words pierced deeper than I expected. I felt the coldness of them travel straight into my chest. Still, I forced a soft laugh, trying to mask the sting. I wasn't asking for every time, Rachel. Just this once. She chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Mom, you don't understand. If I start saying yes to things like this, it'll never end. Next, it'll be errands, groceries, who knows what. I've worked hard to build boundaries. I'm not being cruel, I'm being practical." I swallowed. My throat felt dry. "I see. I didn't mean to inconvenience you. I'm sure you didn't. But seriously, think about it. If you rely on family for everything, you'll only end up disappointed. Services exist for a reason. You should embrace them. It's healthier for everyone." Her voice softened just a little, but only in that polished, detached way she used when closing a deal at work. "Anyway, Mom, I really have to go. Good luck with your appointment." Before I could respond, the line clicked. Dead. I sat with the silence pressing against me. My hand lingered on the phone, my knuckles white from holding it too tightly. Slowly, I lowered it onto the table. Her words replayed over and over in my head. "Family can't be your solution every time. Learn to rely on services. It's healthier for everyone. A service." That was what I was to her, a client who should outsource her needs instead of burdening her. My daughter, the one I had carried, the one I had stayed awake for countless nights nursing fevers, had reduced me to a demand she didn't want on her schedule. I rose from the chair and walked to the mirror by the hallway. My reflection looked older than I remembered, the faint cloudiness in my eyes, a reminder of why I had made the request in the first place. I smiled at myself, though it was a weak, broken sort of smile. "Don't let it show," I whispered. "Don't let them see how much it hurts." The truth was, my heart had gone cold. It wasn't about the ride. It was about what her refusal revealed: her priorities, her distance, her wall of polished independence that left no room for me. I thought of the afternoons when she was in high school, how she used to sit at the kitchen table, books spread out, asking me to quiz her before exams. She had leaned on me then. She had once trusted that I would always show up for her. And I had. Without complaint, without hesitation. Now when I asked for the smallest thing, she dismissed me with a reminder to hire a stranger. I made myself a cup of tea, though my hands shook pouring the hot water. Sitting down, I stared at the steam rising and tried to steady my breathing. "It's just another test," I told myself. "This is why you're doing it, to see them as they truly are." But knowing the reason didn't make the pain any softer. When I finally took my first sip, the tea had already cooled, leaving only a bitter taste in my mouth. I forced another weak smile, this time to no one at all. The second ask had been answered, and the truth had revealed itself again. I folded the memory neatly like a piece of paper and tucked it into my heart where the other hurt already waited. I told myself not to cry, not yet. There was still more to uncover. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that the only person who might not fail me was Emily. My granddaughter, with her gentle eyes and warm presence. She had never once made me feel like a burden. For now, though, I sat in my silent house, the echo of Rachel's words still hanging in the air. Learn to lean on services, not on family. I laughed once softly, though it felt more like breaking. The house was very quiet. When I sat alone after Rachel's refusal, the silence of my little house carried me backward through the years. Painful memories began to stir, weaving themselves with the present until I could no longer separate what had been from what was. My children had not become careless overnight. The roots of their choices stretched deep into the soil of the past. Mark had once been full of fire. In his 20s, he talked about opening his own business, creating something that would free him from the grind of 9-to-5 life. I remember the sparkle in his eyes the first time he showed me the lease papers for a small sports equipment shop. I had clapped my hands and hugged him, though I worried about the risks. "You can do it," I told him, choosing encouragement over caution. At first, things seemed promising. Customers trickled in and Mark carried himself with pride. But within 2 years, the debts piled high. He had overstocked inventory, miscalculated rent, and trusted people who didn't pay their bills. I watched him age 10 years in those two, his hair thinning, his smile becoming brittle. One night, he showed up at my door, shoulders sagging, eyes bloodshot. "Mom, I messed up," he admitted. "I'm drowning." I had made him tea, sat him down, listened as he confessed the unpaid loans, the creditors calling at all hours. I wanted to console him, but I also wanted him to take responsibility. "You can start over," I told him softly. "Failure isn't the end. Learn from it." But instead of learning, he sought quick relief. That was when gambling entered his life. First, it was weekend poker with friends, then sports betting, then late-night trips to the casino. The debts from the business were never paid down. They multiplied. He chased wins that never lasted, always convinced the next hand, the next game, the next season would save him. His frustration turned outward. "If you had lent me more when I asked, maybe I wouldn't be here," he once snapped at me. "Maybe I wouldn't have had to take desperate chances." The words stung. I had lent him what I could, but I also needed to survive. His anger grew sharper as his failures deepened, and somehow I became the symbol of the world that had let him down. Instead of finding healing, he let bitterness root in his heart. Rachel's path had been different, yet the result felt the same. She had always been ambitious, sharp-minded, the kind of girl who dreamed of corner offices and promotions long before she even finished college. After her divorce, she threw herself into work with renewed force, determined to climb higher and prove she didn't need anyone. I still remember the day she called me, voice trembling with something between anger and humiliation. "I lost it, Mom. The promotion. They gave it to someone else because I spoke out at the wrong time. I couldn't keep my mouth shut in that meeting, and it cost me." I had listened heart heavy. "One setback doesn't define you," I reminded her. "You'll have other chances." But Rachel didn't see it that way. That lost promotion became her private wound, the scar she never let heal. From then on, she obsessed over her image. Every outfit, every handshake, every post online, it all had to scream success. She believed she had to compensate for the opportunities she had thrown away. Slowly, the obsession twisted her. She judged others for not keeping up, looked down on anyone who seemed ordinary. Even with me, her mother, she began to speak in clipped tones, as if kindness was weakness. "You wouldn't understand, Mom," she told me once. "In this world, if you don't fight for recognition, you vanish." She didn't realize how her words sliced me open, as if my quiet, ordinary life had no value. I knew my children carried these wounds, Mark's from failure and gambling, Rachel's from ambition derailed. But instead of facing them, they projected the weight onto me. I had become their scapegoat, the one safe target for their frustration. Sometimes I wondered if I had failed them somewhere in the past. Had I been too gentle, too patient, or perhaps too silent when I should have spoken hard truths? The questions circled in my head late at night. Yet another voice whispered inside me, "You gave them love. You gave them stability. What they chose after is their responsibility." I thought of Emily, then my sweet granddaughter. At 15, she had already seen too much the tension in her father's eyes when collectors called the brittle smiles of her aunt when she pretended everything was perfect. Yet somehow Emily remained tender, uncorrupted by the shadows that consumed the adults around her. When she visited, she never asked for anything. She just watered my plants, listened to my stories, laughed at my old-fashioned sayings. She reminded me of the warmth my children once had before life hardened them. Staring out the window that night, I let out a long sigh. My children bore scars, yes, but scars could heal if treated. They had chosen to scratch them open again and again until resentment was all that bled out. And I had chosen, perhaps foolishly, to test whether there was still softness beneath their hardened shells. I whispered to myself, "Their past shaped them, but it doesn't excuse their cruelty." The moonlight streamed across the room, pale and quiet. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat there until the clock ticked past midnight. My heart ached with the knowledge that the people I loved most had allowed their wounds to turn into weapons. Still, I reminded myself this was only part of the journey. I needed to see it through. The truth wasn't finished revealing itself. The day after Rachel brushed me off, I found myself sitting in the kitchen, staring at the same teacup I had reheated twice, but never actually sipped. My heart felt heavy from all the silence between me and my children. Yet in that moment, I longed for something lighter, something that wouldn't press on my chest like a stone. My thoughts drifted toward Emily. I didn't want to burden her. She was only 15, a child who should be worrying about school friends and maybe the occasional pop quiz. Still, whenever I thought of her, my shoulders eased. She had a way of softening the edges of life. That afternoon, I heard a gentle knock on the door. When I opened it, there she was holding a small tin box decorated with stickers of stars and sunflowers. "Grandma," she said brightly, "I made something for you." Her eyes sparkled as she placed the box in my hands. I lifted the lid and found rows of neatly wrapped candies, each one rolled in wax paper. "You made these?" I asked, surprised. "They might be a little lopsided," she admitted, cheeks flushing, "but they're sweet. I thought you'd like them." I popped one into my mouth, letting the sugary taste melt on my tongue. It wasn't perfect. The edges stuck a little, but to me it was better than anything a store could sell. "They're delicious," I said, pulling her into a hug. "You're spoiling me. I just wanted to." She shrugged, sliding into the chair by the table. "I figured you might be bored being here alone. Thought we could hang out." Her words were simple, but they filled me with warmth. No hesitation, no conditions. Just a child's instinct to bring joy. We spent the next hour talking about small things. She told me about a new book she was reading about how her science teacher made experiments feel like magic and how she and her friend were practicing a dance for a school event. Her voice carried life unburdened by bitterness or calculation. At one point, she tilted her head at me. "Grandma, are you okay? You've seemed, I don't know, a little quieter lately." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just getting older, that's all." She wasn't convinced. Her brow furrowed the same way her father's used to when he was small and worried about something. But unlike her father, she didn't turn that worry into anger. She turned it into care. "You want to go for a walk?" she asked suddenly. "It's nice outside, and you always say fresh air helps." I hesitated, then nodded. "That sounds wonderful." We set out down the quiet street, the late afternoon sun painting the sidewalks gold. Emily walked beside me, not rushing ahead like most teenagers would. She matched her steps to mine, holding my arm when the pavement cracked. As we passed a neighbor's garden, she pointed out the roses blooming in different shades. "Which one's your favorite?" she asked. "The pale pink," I said. "It looks gentle, like it's blushing." She laughed softly. "That's so you, Grandma. Always noticing the gentle things." Her words caught me off guard. My own children rarely noticed anything about me beyond what I could provide or fail to provide. Yet this girl, this child, saw me. We sat on a bench near the small park a few blocks away. Kids were playing tag on the grass, their laughter echoing in the open air. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out 2 bottled waters. She handed me one, twisting the cap off before I could even fumble with it. "You think too much, Grandma," she said suddenly, almost reading my mind. "Oh," I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, you get this faraway look like you're carrying something heavy, but you don't have to carry it all alone. You've got me." My throat tightened. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to lean into that innocent promise. "You're just a child, Emily. You shouldn't have to worry about your old grandmother." "I'm not worrying," she insisted. "I just love you. That's different." Her words slipped straight into the cracks of my heart, filling spaces I thought had long gone hollow. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sky shift to deeper shades of orange and purple. Finally, she nudged me. "Grandma, when I'm older, I'm going to buy a little house with a garden and you're going to live right next to me. We'll drink tea every afternoon and I'll bake cookies." "Okay." I chuckled, though my eyes stung with tears. "That sounds like a dream." "It's a promise," she said firmly, as if she could shape the future with sheer determination. I reached out and squeezed her hand. It was warm, steady, and full of life. I knew then that Emily was more than just a bright spot in my days. She was proof that not everything had soured, that goodness could survive, even in the shadow of disappointment. On the walk back, she slipped her arm through mine again. "You know, Grandma, you're my favorite person," she whispered. I swallowed hard, too, moved to respond right away. Finally, I managed, "And you, Emily, are the best gift life has given me. When we reached my front porch, she turned to me with that wide, unguarded smile that reminded me of sunshine breaking through clouds. "I'll come by tomorrow. Maybe we can try planting some herbs in pots. You'll have to teach me." I nodded, feeling a rare lightness in my chest. I'd love that. As I closed the door behind her, I lingered by the window, watching her walk down the street until she disappeared around the corner. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt so empty. Emily's presence lingered like a soft glow, reminding me that love, real uncalculated love, still lived in this family, even if only in the heart of a 15-year-old girl. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe there was hope. It began quietly, almost like a breeze slipping under a door. One morning, I overheard the faintest whisper when I stepped into Rachel's apartment to drop off a basket of lemons from my tree. She didn't realize I was already in the hallway, and through the partly closed door, I heard her voice low and clipped. "Mark, she must have something saved. People her age don't just coast by on pension money. Maybe she's hiding it." Mark's laugh was sharp, almost bitter. "You think so? She sure acts like she doesn't have a dime, always talking about the roof or her bills. But I've seen the way she guards that old desk in the living room. She keeps all kinds of papers locked up." I froze. The basket grew heavier in my hands, my own children speculating about what I had or hadn't hidden away. Rachel muttered again, her tone taut. "If she has anything, she's not being honest. What kind of parent hides money from her kids?" Mark scoffed. "The kind who probably plans to hand it all over to charity or bury it with her. Who knows with her? She's stubborn." My hand trembled as I pushed open the door and they both jumped. Rachel recovered quickly, plastering a smile on her face. "Mom, we didn't hear you come in." I set the basket down and looked at them, my throat dry. "You two were talking about something important, I see." Mark waved it off, forcing a laugh. "Nothing serious, just the usual family stuff." Rachel's eyes darted toward her brother, then back at me. "Thank you for the lemons, Mom. These look great." The air in the room had shifted. I could feel their eyes on me, measuring, weighing, as though I had become a puzzle they couldn't solve. Over the following weeks, I noticed the change. Whenever I invited them over, their conversations drifted toward money, subtle at first. Rachel leaned on the counter one afternoon, swirling her glass of sparkling water. "Mom, it must be tough to maintain that house all by yourself." "How do you manage?" I smiled faintly. "One step at a time." She pressed further. "Ham, you've always been careful with finances. I remember you clipping coupons when we were kids. Surely you set something aside." I didn't answer, only folded the kitchen towel in my hands. Her curiosity wasn't born out of care. It was suspicion thinly veiled as casual interest. Mark was less subtle. One evening, he stopped by under the pretense of checking on me. His eyes roamed the living room, lingering on my locked desk drawer. "You still keep all your papers in there?" he asked. "Yes," I replied simply. He smirked. "Bet there's more than papers inside." I turned to him slowly. "What exactly are you implying?" He shrugged, raising his hands. "Nothing, Mom. Just saying you're secretive makes a guy wonder." That was the heart of it. They were wondering. Not about my health, not about my days, not about my loneliness. They were wondering about money. At night, lying awake in bed, I thought about how the years had shifted us. Once they had clung to me for warmth, for safety, for reassurance. Now they seemed to circle me with narrowed eyes as if I were a vault instead of a mother. The rumors only grew. At a family dinner, Rachel leaned across the table toward her brother. "I heard from one of Mom's old friends that she used to help with community projects. That takes money. She must have kept some tucked away." Mark barked a laugh. "Exactly. She plays poor, but I think she's holding out on us." I set down my fork, appetite gone. Emily glanced between us, her young face clouded with confusion. She asked softly, "Why does it matter Grandma's fine? Isn't that what's important?" Rachel brushed her off. "Sweetheart, you'll understand when you're older." Emily frowned but didn't argue. I felt her hand slip under the table to squeeze mine. That one small gesture kept me from breaking down right then and there. In the days that followed, I could feel their eyes on me even more. Rachel would ask pointed questions about my errands, where I went, what I bought. Mark dropped by twice in 1 week, both times circling the house as if looking for something. I kept my composure. I answered lightly, deflecting, refusing to give them the satisfaction of certainty. Inside, though, each whisper and sideways glance cut deeper. I wanted to scream, "I am not a treasure chest. I am your mother." But I knew the words would fall flat. They had built their own narrative, and in it I was no longer the woman who raised them. I was a keeper of some imagined fortune. One afternoon, while watering the potted plants on my porch, Rachel appeared clutching her designer handbag like a shield. "Mom," she began, her voice deceptively gentle, "if you ever do have something saved, you can trust me, you know. I'd use it wisely, for investments, for stability. Not like Mark." The air went still. She didn't notice the hurt flash across my face as she continued, "It's just, you're not getting younger. You don't want everything to go to waste, do you?" I turned back to the plants, the hose steady in my hands. "Rachel," I said evenly, if I had anything worth worrying about, "don't you think I'd decide what to do with it myself?" Her mouth tightened. She wanted more, but didn't dare push further. When she left, the silence of the house wrapped around me again, yet it felt different this time. Heavier. Suspicion had seeped into my children's hearts, corroding whatever tenderness might have remained. I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on and whispered to myself, so this is what they see me as. Not a mother, not a woman, but a possibility. The thought chilled me, but it also hardened something inside. If they wanted to peer at me like vultures circling, I would endure it. I would not hand them pieces of my soul just to quiet their curiosity. And so the rumors persisted, unspoken, but heavy a shadow in every conversation. A shadow that reminded me of one painful truth: my own children saw me not as family, but as a mystery they wanted solved at any cost. I was the one who suggested we all have dinner together at Mark's house. It had been months since we'd sat down as a family, and I knew they would come if I insisted. Rachel liked the appearance of unity. Mark couldn't refuse me outright, and Emily, sweet Emily, wouldn't miss any chance to be near me. As I walked up the short flight of steps to Mark's door, I reminded myself why I had done this. My health wasn't perfect, but tonight I would make it seem worse than it was. I wanted to see once and for all whether the people I had raised could still summon any instinct of care when it mattered. Mark opened the door with a weary expression. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and his tie hung loose around his neck. "Mom, you're early," he muttered. I smiled faintly. I didn't want to rush. Inside, Rachel was arranging silverware on the table with clinical precision. "Dinner's simple," she announced. Mark picked up takeout. I didn't have time to cook. Emily darted out from the kitchen, her braids bouncing. "Grandma, sit here next to me." She patted the chair beside hers. We all gathered around the table. The food smelled rich, but the atmosphere was tense, as though everyone had brought their private suspicions along. I looked from one face to the next, my sons guarded, my daughters impatient, my granddaughters open and bright. The meal started with stilted small talk. Rachel went on about her latest project at work, sprinkling her sentences with jargon as though rehearsing for an audience. Mark barely listened, his eyes on his phone more than his plate. Emily tried to keep the peace, chatting about a school play. Halfway through, I pressed a hand to my chest and let my fork clatter against the plate. The sound made everyone glance up. I bowed my head slightly and whispered, "I haven't been feeling well. Lately, it's been worse. There are moments when I think I should go to the hospital." The room froze. For one breathless instant, I thought they might rise together, offer comfort, promise to help. But instead, silence pooled like cold water around us. Rachel set down her glass carefully. "Mom, you should probably schedule an appointment. Doctors can figure out what's going on." I lifted my eyes to her. That's what I meant. I may need someone to take me to sit with me there. Hospitals are overwhelming. Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Mom, you know my schedule. I can't just leave work, and Rachel's always buried in meetings. You could take a cab or even arrange one of those services that drive seniors around. Emily's fork slipped from her hand. She stared at them, appalled. She's not asking for a stranger. She's asking for family. Her voice quivered, but the adults ignored it. Rachel forced a smile, the kind meant to close a subject. Emily, sweetheart, you'll understand when you're older. Everyone's busy. Grandma knows we love her. I swallowed hard, willing my face to remain calm. I see. I don't want to be a burden. Mark gave a short laugh, the sound edged with frustration. You're not a burden, Mom, but you've got to be realistic. You can't expect us to rearrange everything every time you feel off. That's what services are for. Their words cut deeper than any doctor's diagnosis could have. I looked around the table at the children I had carried and raised, and at the one child who wasn't mine by birth, but seemed to be the only one with any heart. Emily pushed her chair back slightly, her eyes brimming. She leaned close to me and whispered, Grandma, don't sign anything. Please. The words startled me. I turned to her, searching her face. She pressed her small hand against mine under the table and whispered again, Trust me. No one else seemed to notice the quiet plea, but her words echoed louder in my heart than all of Mark and Rachel's excuses. For a moment I forgot my staged weakness. I simply stared at Emily, realizing she saw more clearly than any of them. I forced myself to continue the act, to play out the test I had set in motion. I pressed my hand against my temple and said softly, Maybe I should go lie down. I feel faint. Rachel rose, though her movements were slow, as if dragged by obligation. I'll get you some water, she murmured. Mark didn't move. He just tapped his phone against the table, restless, as though waiting for the evening to end. Emily wrapped her arm around me. I'll stay with you, Grandma. That was the truth revealed in the silence, one small girl's loyalty against two adults' indifference. When Rachel returned with the water, she placed it in front of me without meeting my eyes. Drink this. You'll feel better. I nodded, took a sip, and set the glass down with trembling fingers, trembling not from weakness, but from the ache of recognition. The test was complete. Their silence had spoken louder than any confession. The dinner limped on after that. Plates clinked, words were spoken, but the warmth was gone. Every glance carried tension. Every pause stretched too long. At the end of the meal, Rachel gathered the dishes with mechanical efficiency. Mark stood announcing he had emails to answer. Emily lingered, her hand never leaving mine until the very last moment. As I stepped out into the night air, I drew in a deep breath. My heart was heavy, yet clearer than it had been in years. Tonight had confirmed what I had suspected. My children were watching me not out of love, but out of calculation. But amid that cold truth, one whisper still glowed. Don't sign anything, please. Emily's warning had been soft, almost fragile, but I carried it with me like a shield. That night, as I lay awake, I replayed every detail, the stillness around the table, the excuses, the silence. This dinner would stay etched in my memory as the moment everything shifted, the moment my eyes opened fully to the shadows in my own family. The silence at Mark's dinner table pressed down like a heavy curtain. My test was almost over, but my heart was heavier than I had prepared for. I had expected hesitation, perhaps excuses, but the cold indifference of my children still pierced me deeper than I wanted to admit. Then all at once, Emily's chair scraped against the floor. She rose to her feet, her small body trembling with a fury I had never seen from her. Her cheeks flushed and her hands balled into fists. Why is everyone so quiet? She demanded, her voice ringing across the room. Grandma needs help. She just said she feels sick and you all sit there like nothing happened. Rachel gasped. Emily, sit down right now. Don't raise your voice at the table. But Emily's eyes burned with tears and determination. No, I won't sit down. If you won't help her, then I will. I'll call Uncle Daniel. He'll drive her to the hospital. At least he cares about people." The words slammed into the silence like thunder. Mark shot up from his chair, his face reddening. "You don't speak to your elders that way. Don't you dare mention an outsider in family business. You're being disrespectful." His hand smacked the table so hard the plates rattled. Emily flinched, but didn't back down. "What's disrespectful is letting Grandma beg for help while you talk about taxis and services like she's a stranger. She's your mother. Don't you get it?" I felt my breath catch. My sweet granddaughter, the youngest at the table, was the only one brave enough to stand for me. Rachel's face tightened with embarrassment. She looked around as though worried the neighbors might overhear through the walls. "Emily, stop this nonsense right now. You're ruining dinner. Do you realize how dramatic you sound? Grandma will be fine." Emily turned on her mother with fiery eyes. "No, Mom. You're the one who sounds ridiculous. She's sick, and you don't even want to drive her to the doctor. What kind of daughter does that?" Rachel's voice cracked into a sharp whisper meant to sting. "Enough. You're acting like a spoiled child, and you're embarrassing me in front of your grandmother." Mark's fury rose again. He jabbed a finger in Emily's direction. "I won't allow this disrespect in my house. Sit down before I lose my patience." The room quivered with anger. The takeout cartons sat forgotten, the smell of food turning sour in the thick tension. I watched the faces of my children, hard defensive, more concerned with authority and appearances than the truth standing before them. Emily's voice softened, but her defiance did not fade. She turned back to me, her eyes full of pain. "Grandma, I'll make sure you're taken care of, even if it's not them. You don't have to be afraid." Her words broke something inside me. Tears stung my eyes, but I forced them back. My children's reaction to her courage revealed what I had long refused to accept. Their love had twisted into something conditional, tangled up with pride, resentment, and suspicion. Rachel gripped Emily's arm, trying to pull her down into the chair. "You don't understand, Emily. Adults have responsibilities. We can't just drop everything." Emily jerked her arm free. "Then what's the point of family if you're too busy to care? If Grandma can't count on you, then who is she supposed to count on?" The table fell into stunned silence again. For a long moment, only the ticking clock in the hallway filled the air. I looked at my granddaughter standing tall despite the tears sliding down her cheeks. Her innocence had been forced into bravery, her love for me burning brighter than the fear of punishment. Rachel finally sank into her chair, pressing her lips into a thin line. Mark rubbed his temples and muttered, "This is getting out of hand." But nothing could erase what had been spoken. The truth hung in the room, undeniable. I reached across the table and took Emily's trembling hand. Her fingers were small and warm, anchoring me in the storm. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered. "You've said what needed to be said." Rachel's eyes darted away, shame flickering for just a second before pride buried it. Mark muttered something about finishing dinner, but his voice lacked conviction. The evening stumbled forward after that, each of us locked in silence. Plates were cleared without a word. The tension lingered in every corner of the room. When it was finally time to leave, Rachel hugged me stiffly at the door, whispering, "We'll talk later." Her tone carried more irritation than concern. Mark gave me a distracted pat on the shoulder, already half turned back to his phone. But Emily clung to me tightly, her face pressed against my chest. "Don't forget Grandma," she whispered again. "Don't sign anything unless you want to. Promise me." I kissed the top of her head. "I promise." Walking out into the night, the cool air struck my face and cleared the haze of the evening. My body ached not from illness but from heartbreak, yet inside a new clarity formed. Emily had shattered the silence. She had spoken the truth aloud, and once spoken, it could not be hidden again. My children's indifference had been laid bare, exposed not by my test alone, but by the courage of a child who refused to look away. As I made my way home, her words replayed in my mind like a steady drumbeat. "At least he cares about people. If Grandma can't count on you, then who is she supposed to count on?" The pain was real, but so was the light that Emily's defiance had kindled in me. In that storm of anger and denial, she had stood tall, and in her I finally saw the proof that love, real love, still lived somewhere in this family. The morning after that dinner, I woke with a heaviness that could no longer be ignored. My body felt weak, but it was my heart that bore the greater weight. I had seen everything I needed to see at Mark's table: the silence, the excuses, the anger when Emily dared to speak. There was no more room for illusions. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea cooling in my hands, staring at the steam as though it held an answer. For years, I had waited for my children to treat me with warmth. I had thought maybe, just maybe, they would soften as life matured them. Instead, the opposite had happened. Their hunger for control, for appearances, for money seemed only to sharpen with time. I thought of Emily's trembling voice standing up for me when no one else would. A part of me longed to protect her, to shield her from the storm that was surely coming. But another part of me knew I had to protect myself, too. For the first time, I realized those two things were not separate. By late morning, I had called Mr. Harris, my lawyer. His voice was steady and professional, though I thought I caught a trace of concern when he heard the weariness in mine. "Come in this afternoon, Linda," he said. "We'll settle this once and for all. It's time." The ride to his office was quiet. My hands folded over my purse. I stared out the window at streets I had driven down for decades. Every shop and tree seemed strangely sharper, as if the world wanted me to notice it one last time in this particular way. Mr. Harris's office was on the third floor of a modest brick building. The elevator creaked slightly as it lifted me upward, and when the doors opened, I was greeted by the faint smell of polished wood and paper. His secretary smiled politely as I entered, her eyes soft with a respect I had not felt from my own family in a long while. "Mrs. Parker, he's expecting you," she said gently. I nodded and stepped into his office. The blinds were half open, letting in streaks of sunlight across the polished desk. The air was still almost solemn. Mr. Harris stood as I entered, extending his hand. "Linda, please sit." I lowered myself into the chair opposite him, my hands trembling slightly as I rested them on the armrests. He watched me carefully before reaching into his drawer and pulling out a folder thick with documents. "These are the papers we discussed," he said. His tone was calm, measured, but beneath it, I could sense he knew. This moment was not just business. It was something far heavier. I pressed my palms together, willing my heart to steady. I've thought about it all night. I don't have the strength to fight with them anymore. I just want peace. Mr. Harris nodded slowly. "Peace can take many forms, but once you sign Linda, you must be certain." "Are you certain?" The question lingered. My throat tightened, but I refused to cry. I had shed enough tears in private. Now I wanted something different, not relief exactly, but a surrender of the burden I had carried for too long. "Yes," I whispered. "I am." He slid the papers across the desk, turning them toward me. The black ink of the printed words seemed to blur for a moment before my eyes. I picked up the pen he laid beside them. My fingers trembled so violently that the pen nearly slipped. I inhaled deeply, letting the air fill me, then pressed the tip against the line marked with my name. Slowly, deliberately, I wrote each letter, Linda. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper echoed in my ears like thunder. When I lifted the pen, my hand fell to my lap. My heart did not break, nor did I feel any sudden rush of regret. Instead, a strange stillness settled over me. It was not happiness, not sorrow, just quiet acceptance. Mr. Harris studied my face. "You're not crying," he observed softly. I gave him a faint smile. "No, the tears left me a long time ago. This is just letting go." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. I realized then that I was not weaker for signing. If anything, I had found a different kind of strength. The strength to stop begging for love. where it would not be given. The strength to walk away from illusions. Mr. Harris placed the papers back into the folder with care. "It's done," he said. "You've taken a difficult step, Linda, but sometimes difficult steps are the only way forward." I nodded, though my chest ached. Forward. That word felt both terrifying and freeing. As I rose from the chair, my knees wavered, but I steadied myself. My hand lingered on the edge of the desk for a moment before I straightened. "Thank you," I murmured. He gave me a respectful bow of his head. "If you ever need me again, my door is open." Walking out of the office, I carried no folder, no weight of paper. What I carried instead was the echo of the pen against the page, the quiet finality of my own decision. The afternoon sun hit my face as I stepped onto the street, warmer than it had been that morning. I paused on the sidewalk, closing my eyes for just a moment. The world felt the same, yet I knew something within me had shifted. I did not cry. I did not collapse. I simply stood there, feeling the hum of life around me, and let the truth settle in. I had given up not on myself, but on waiting for what would never come. And strangely, in that surrender, I found a silence I could finally endure. It had been a week since I walked out of Mr. Harris's office with my decision sealed in ink. For days afterward, I lived quietly, keeping to myself. I watered the small garden in front of my house, sat by the window with tea, and let the silence surround me. On the surface, nothing had changed, but beneath it, everything had. Then the phone calls began. Not to me, never directly to me, but to Mr. Harris. I knew it would happen. My children had always been sharp when it came to sensing the scent of money, and sooner or later, word was bound to travel. Still, I was not prepared for the sheer force of their outrage once the truth reached them. It was a Thursday afternoon when Mr. Harris asked me to come to his office again. "They want clarification," he said. His voice carried that careful calm he always wore, but I could hear the weight beneath it. When I arrived, I saw Mark and Rachel already waiting in the reception area. Mark's jaw was clenched, his face red as though he had stormed across town. Rachel looked pale, but her eyes glittered with fury. Neither greeted me. I walked past them, my steps steady, though inside my chest a slow ache grew. Mr. Harris ushered us into his office and gestured for us to sit. The air was thick with tension. Mark leaned forward, slapping his hand against the arm of his chair. "So it's true then," he demanded. "You had money all along, millions, and you let us, your own children, struggle while you kept this secret." Rachel's voice was sharp, laced with disbelief. "Why didn't you tell us, Mom? All those times you acted like you had nothing. Was that just some kind of game?" I sat quietly, folding my hands in my lap. My voice, when it came, was steady. It was never a game, and the money was never meant to be the answer to your problems. Mark's face twisted. "Then what was it for Charity Strangers? Do you realize what we could have done with that? Do you realize what you've denied us?" Before I could reply, Mr. Harris lifted a hand, signaling for silence. He opened the thick folder on his desk and adjusted his glasses. "Let us review the will in its official form. Perhaps that will clear the air." The rustle of papers filled the room. Rachel sat rigid, her eyes locked on him. Mark tapped his fingers against the chair arm, the impatience radiating off him. Mr. Harris began his tone, formal and deliberate. Upon the passing of Mrs. Linda Parker, the majority of her estate, approximately $6 million, will be directed into a charitable foundation. The focus of this foundation will be scholarships for disadvantaged students and funding for community programs. The words hung heavy in the room. Mark blinked as though he had not heard correctly. Rachel's lips parted in shock. "What?" Mark exploded, his voice booming. $6 million to strangers, to random kids. This is absurd. Rachel turned to me, her face stricken. "You're giving it away. All of it." Mr. Harris cleared his throat and continued. "Not all of it. A portion has been set aside in trust for Emily Parker, your granddaughter. The remaining assets, household effects, personal belongings will be distributed as outlined here." He tapped the document. Rachel gasped. "Emily, she's just a child. How could you leave her money and not us?" Mark slammed his fist onto the desk. "This is betrayal, Mom. You chose her over your own children." I looked at them both, their faces twisted with anger and disbelief, and felt a strange calm settle over me. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, but the reality was even sharper than I imagined. "You say I chose her?" I said softly, "but the truth is, she chose me. When none of you would stand beside me, she did. When I was left sitting alone, she brought me kindness. She is still young, still pure enough to see me as more than a burden." Rachel shook her head furiously. "She manipulated you. She's a child. She doesn't know what she's doing." Mark's voice was harsh. "We're your blood, Mom. We're the ones who should inherit, not a girl with candy and childish words. How could you humiliate us like this?" I inhaled slowly, holding their gaze. "Blood means nothing without love. I waited years for you to treat me like a mother, not a vault. And now I am done waiting." The silence that followed was louder than their shouting. Mark's chest heaved, but he had no words. Rachel pressed her lips together until they turned white. Mr. Harris closed the folder with a quiet snap. "The will is legal, binding, and final. I advise you both to accept it. Contesting it will not change the outcome." Rachel stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "You'll regret this, Mom," she whispered before storming out of the room. Mark lingered a moment longer, his glare heavy with something between fury and disbelief. Then he too turned and left the door, slamming behind him. For a long moment the room was still. I sat back, releasing a breath I had not realized I was holding. My hands trembled slightly, but not with fear. It was release like air finally finding its way into a suffocating space. Mr. Harris looked at me with quiet respect. "You knew this would be their reaction." "Yes," I murmured, "but I also knew it was the only way to make peace with myself." As I rose from the chair, I felt lighter than I had in years. The anger of my children could not touch me anymore. What mattered was that Emily would know she had been seen, that kindness had not been forgotten. And somewhere in the laughter of the students who would someday walk across a stage with scholarships in hand, I hoped a part of me would live on. The days after the will was revealed were heavy and tense. I had thought perhaps silence would follow, that my children would retreat into their own lives, but instead the storm gathered force. It began with Mark. He came to my house unannounced one evening, his footsteps pounding against the porch, his fist banging on the door until I opened it. His face was flushed, his eyes wild. "How could you?" he shouted before I could even greet him. He stormed past me into the living room, slamming his hand down on the coffee table so hard the teacups rattled. "Do you realize what you've done? You humiliated me. You robbed me of what was rightfully mine." I stood still. My fingers curled tightly around the edge of my shawl. "I robbed you of nothing," I said quietly. Mark's voice rose even higher. "You had millions, and instead of helping your own children, you hand it to strangers and that little girl who whispered in your ear. You're playing favorites, Mom, and it's sickening." His words cut deep, but there was no tremor in my response. "It is not favoritism to reward compassion. Emily gave what you never did, kindness without condition." Mark leaned forward, his knuckles white as they pressed into the table. "Don't twist this. You're my mother. I worked my whole life expecting that, when the time came, you would at least treat me fairly. Instead, you made me look like a fool in front of everyone." Before I could reply, Rachel entered quietly. She had followed him, though she lingered by the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mark," she whispered, "please stop shouting." Then her gaze turned to me, trembling. "Mom, I don't understand. I don't understand why you didn't tell us. Why you let us believe you had nothing." Her voice cracked and tears spilled down her cheeks. She clutched a tissue in her hand, twisting it until it nearly tore. I thought maybe you didn't trust us, and maybe you were right. But it hurts. It hurts so much to know that when it mattered, you turned away from us. I stepped closer, though my hands shook. Rachel, I did not turn away. I waited for years. I wanted love, not calculation. I wanted to be seen, not measured. Do you understand that she pressed the tissue to her mouth and sobbed a sound raw with regret? I should have been there. I should have done more. Mark whipped around, glaring at her. Don't you dare side with her. She played us both Rachel. She dangled this fortune like bait, and now she's cast us aside. Don't you see? She's choosing that granddaughter to spite us. Stop it, Mark, Rachel cried. Can't you see she's hurting too? Mark slammed his palm against the wall, his voice shaking with rage. Hurting, she's sitting on her throne of righteousness while we get scraps. Well, I won't accept it. I'll fight this in court. I'll prove she was manipulated. That will is invalid, and I'll see it torn apart if it's the last thing I do. The air grew cold around us. His threat was not idle. I could see it in the set of his jaw, the fire in his eyes. True to his word, within weeks he had filed papers contesting the will. He claimed undue influence, that Emily and Mr. Harris had pressured me, that I was not of sound mind. Each accusation stung like a thorn pressed into my skin. But the truth was undeniable. The records were clear, the medical reports firm. Mr. Harris's documentation left no cracks for lies to slip through. The court dismissed his claims swiftly, leaving him standing red-faced and hollow. When the judgment was read, I sat in the back of the courtroom, my hands folded neatly, my face calm. Mark turned toward me with fury blazing, but behind it, I glimpsed something else. Fear, desperation, the sharp edge of loss. Rachel beside him wept openly. She tried to cover her face, but her sobs filled the room. I heard her whisper, "What have we done?" over and over, as though the words might undo the reality pressing down on her. Outside the courthouse, Mark confronted me again. "This isn't over," he growled. But the hollow in his voice betrayed him. He had lost, and he knew it. Rachel lingered a few steps away, her tears streaking her cheeks. She looked at me, her expression torn between bitterness and longing. "Mom?" she said softly. "I wish I could go back. I wish I could change how things were." I met her gaze, my heart heavy. "We cannot change the past, Rachel. We can only live with what we chose." She broke down again, clutching her face. Mark walked off his shoulders, rigid, refusing to look back. I stood there for a long time, watching them drift away like two ships lost in a storm of their own making. The ache in my chest was sharp, but it was not regret. It was sorrow for what could have been sorrow, for the years wasted on bitterness, the love that could have bloomed but never did. Back at home, I sat in my chair by the window, the late afternoon sun spilling across the floor. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle around me. I thought of Emily, her voice steady and fierce at the dinner table when everyone else stayed silent. I thought of her hand slipping into mine, reminding me that I was not invisible. Mark and Rachel were drowning in disappointment, but it was water they had chosen to step into. My choice was different. I had chosen freedom, truth, and the faint hope that love could still grow in the heart of the one who had not turned away. The day after the court hearing, I found myself exhausted in a way I had never known before. My body was tired, yes, but it was my heart that bore the greater weight. Mark's fury and Rachel's tears echoed inside me, a chorus of grief and resentment that I could not silence. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the leaves outside tremble in the late summer breeze. The air smelled faintly of rain, clean and sharp, like a new beginning, waiting to break through. I closed my eyes, unsure whether to pray, to weep, or to simply sit still until the ache softened. It was then that I heard the soft creak of the door. Light footsteps crossed the floor. When I opened my eyes, Emily stood there, her backpack still slung over one shoulder, her eyes swollen as though she had been crying too. "Grandma," she whispered, dropping the bag to the floor. In 2 steps, she was beside me, her arms wrapped around my frail shoulders. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want any of this. I don't need your money. I don't care about any of that. I just want you to know I love you. That's all I ever wanted you to know." Her words broke the last wall inside me. Tears welled up and slipped down my cheeks as I held her close, my hands pressing into her back as though I could keep her there forever. My voice shook, but I forced the words out clearly. "Oh, Emily, you've already given me more than anyone else ever did." She pulled back slightly, her face damp, her expression raw and unguarded. "But I didn't do anything. I just tried to be there for you." I smiled through my tears. "That's everything. Do you realize how rare it is a heart that shows up without asking for reward that is worth more than all the gold in the world?" Emily shook her head, her hair falling into her eyes. "But you gave me so much. The trust fund, the scholarship money. Grandma, I can't take it. It feels wrong. I don't want you to think that's why I stayed by your side." Her voice cracked and she buried her face into her hands. "I just wanted you to feel loved." I reached out, gently lowering her hands so she would look at me. "Emily, listen to me. Money cannot buy love. If it could, Mark and Rachel would have given me the world. What you gave me was something they never managed: honesty, loyalty, tenderness. That cannot be repaid, but I wanted you to know I saw it. I wanted the world to see it too." She sniffled, her eyes glistening. "But now they all hate me. Uncle Mark, Aunt Rachel, they'll never forgive me." I shook my head slowly. "Their anger is not yours to carry. They chose their path. They wanted wealth without love, power without responsibility. You chose something different, and that choice brought you here to me. You must not let their bitterness poison what is good inside you." Her lips trembled, and then she leaned forward again, hugging me tighter than before. "I don't care what they think. I just care about you." We stayed like that for a long while, the house silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. I could feel her heartbeat against mine, strong and steady, as though it was trying to lend me its youth. When she finally pulled away, she wiped her tears and tried to smile. "Grandma, I promise I'll use what you gave me wisely. Not just the money, but the lessons. I'll make sure you're proud of me." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You already have. But yes, live with the same kindness you've shown me. Let it guide you, and you will never regret your choices." The truth of it struck me in that moment. I had lived long enough to see the contrast laid bare. Greed had hollowed out 2 of my children, leaving them grasping at shadows, furious when the light revealed their emptiness. But love, simple and unadorned, had raised up this young girl into something far greater than wealth could ever shape. That night, as Emily helped me prepare tea in the kitchen, I studied her quietly. She moved with a mixture of clumsiness and care, fumbling a little with the teapot, but determined to do it right. Her laughter when she spilled a few drops was like balm on my weary spirit. "See?" she said with a grin. "I'm hopeless at this, but at least I'm trying." I chuckled softly. "Trying is all anyone can ask, and you've done far more than try, Emily. You've loved when it was hardest to love. That is a gift not many give." Her eyes softened, and she placed the teacup in front of me carefully. "Then let me keep giving it." I raised the cup to my lips, the warmth spreading through my hands, through my chest. For the first time in many years, peace filled me, not because battles had been won, but because the truth had found its rightful home. Emily leaned across the table, her chin resting in her hands, studying me with a seriousness rare for her age. "Grandma," she said quietly, "I think you're the bravest person I know." I shook my head. "No, child. Bravery is loving when no one else does. That's you." Her cheeks flushed, and she laughed awkwardly, trying to hide how much it meant. But I saw it. I saw her heart wide open, shining brighter than anything else in my life. And in that simple kitchen with tea steaming between us and the night wrapping its calm arms around the house, the truth was undeniable. Those who sought everything had lost it all, and the one who had asked for nothing had received everything that mattered. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that lingers after storms. Afternoon sunlight poured across my desk, golden and warm painting, soft streaks across the open pages of my journal. The pen rested between my fingers, trembling a little, but steady enough to form words that had been waiting inside me for so long. I looked at the neat lines I had written earlier in the day, then dipped the pen once more and began. I inherited millions of dollars, but I kept it hidden. I wanted to know the truth, not the rehearsed pleasantries of children who assumed I was helpless, but the raw heart underneath. I visited my family hoping to find love without condition. What I discovered was silence, excuses, and judgment. Their hands never reached for mine. Their eyes never searched for my heart. They only measured what I could give them and when I would give it. My breath caught, but I forced myself to keep going. When the silence grew heavy and when their masks slipped, I finally saw what they valued. And it was not me. They turned away, but in that darkness, one small hand held on. A young voice whispered not for riches, not for favor, but simply for love. One stayed, and that was enough. My hand paused. The ink glistened wet on the page, then sank slowly into the paper. A lump rose in my throat, thick and heavy. For a long moment I stared out the window where the sky stretched open, soft clouds, tinged with amber, the promise of dusk, drawing near. Emily's laughter drifted faintly from the garden. She was chasing a butterfly, her voice bright and unguarded. I closed my journal gently, my palm pressing the cover flat, as if sealing the truth into it forever. When she came inside, cheeks flushed, hair wild from the wind, she looked at me with those same earnest eyes that had saved me from despair. "Grandma, are you ready for our walk?" I nodded, pushing myself up from the chair. My legs were not as strong as they once were, but I did not feel weak. I felt anchored, grounded by the strength of something no storm could shake. "Yes, dear. Let's go before the sun sets." We walked slowly toward the beach, the path lined with sand and seagrass, the air salty and alive. Emily slipped her hand into mine without a word, her fingers warm, firm, and sure. For years I had imagined endings filled with bitterness, with loneliness, or with the ache of regret. Yet now, with the rhythm of the waves in the distance and the soft press of her hand in mine, I understood something simpler. Endings did not have to be defeats. They could be quiet beginnings dressed in the colors of farewell. Grandma Emily said softly as the ocean came into view, its surface shimmering with the fire of the sinking sun, "Do you ever regret it?" Not telling them about the money sooner, I squeezed her hand, my gaze fixed on the horizon. No, because if I had, I would never have known the truth. Sometimes silence is the only way to hear what lies behind words. She tilted her head, thinking, "And you're not sad about Uncle Mark and Aunt Rachel." The waves rolled in foam, hissing gently as they reached the shore. I thought of their anger, their disappointment, the way their faces twisted when the will was read. A sharp pang pierced my chest, but it was not unbearable. Sad, yes, but not broken. They made their choice. I cannot live their lives for them, nor can I beg them to live mine with me. Emily's eyes glistened, and she leaned her head against my arm as we walked. "I'm glad you chose me." I smiled faintly, watching the sun sink lower, turning the water to molten gold. It was never a choice, Emily. Love doesn't weigh options. It simply knows where it belongs. We walked along the sand until the water lapped at our shoes, cool and playful. Emily splashed a little, giggling, and I let myself laugh too, the sound surprising me with its lightness. The world had not changed. The waves still rose and fell. The gulls still circled overhead. But inside me, something had shifted, something final and free. I slowed my steps, lifting my face toward the glowing sky. All my life, I whispered, I thought I needed many hands to hold me, many voices to affirm me, but in the end, one was enough. Emily turned to me, curiosity flickering in her gaze. "What did you say, Grandma?" I shook my head, gently smiling. "Nothing, darling. Just talking to the sea." But inside, the words echoed with certainty. One hand, one heart, one voice had been enough to steady me, to remind me that I was not forgotten, that I was loved not for what I owned, but for who I was. As we walked farther down the beach, the sun kissed the horizon, spilling its last light across the water. Emily's hand stayed in mine, small but unyielding, and for the first time in many years, I felt whole.